Welcome everyone to another session of the Microsoft Excel Toronto Meetup group. Today we have Chris Gross with us, who is a product manager at Microsoft, and that means he is part of the team building Excel. And today he will be sharing with us a tool that we can, as it is an add-in, so we can add it to Excel to do extra fun and very useful stuff for us. Chris will talk about it. I will present Chris in just a minute or a couple of minutes. I have a couple of announcements to share with you guys. So as you know, the session is being recorded. It will be posted on our YouTube channel. So if you stay on, you consent to be part of the recording. It could be on the chat or on your video, audio. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat during the session. In a few days, we will be posting the video on our YouTube channel, and we will send out an email with a link for the video and any other pieces of information we may have to share. Just introducing the organizers of this meetup. My name is Celia Alves. I am a Microsoft Excel MVP. Meaning that I have the privilege to be in contact with the Microsoft Excel engineers and developers, the Excel team and other MVPs, which puts me in a very privileged situation to have access to some information, to be able to deal with very clever and intelligent people who know a lot about Excel, and it's just amazing to be part of that group. I started this group a while ago in 2019, and at that time we used to run these sessions in person. Here in Toronto, with the pandemic times, we moved on to running the sessions online, which made the group grow a lot because now anyone can attend from anywhere in the world and anyone can present from anywhere in the world. And so we are keeping the sessions online, at least for now. Grania, can you introduce yourself? Grania has been with us since the very first session.
And enjoying every minute of it. It's been just wonderful being involved. Those first few sessions when we were in person, it was just such a thrill to actually meet people in real life that also liked Excel. So yeah. or more than liked Excel. So that was really quite something. And then since then, I've just been helping Celia in the background, and lately a little less in the background, but it's been
Grania has been
the experience. So thanks, Celia, for including me in this.
Oh, my pleasure. Grania has been doing a great job. One of the things that she does is creating the chapters on the videos on YouTube. So every time we want to go back to find something that we remember having learned in the past in one of the sessions, we can find it more easily with those chapters. And that's one of the aspects only. Yeah, so this group is for everyone. Feel free to if you have any suggestions of topics or of presenters, or you want to present yourself something, feel free to reach out. That's why this group was created, to meet other people who like Excel and to learn from each other. Okay. Our next session will be in June the 12th. It will be Matiha Prihatl. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly. He works with Zebra BI, which is a tool that allows us to improve our charts in Excel. So he will be teaching us about telling stories with charts in Excel and how we can use that tool along with other Excel techniques to make our charts look better and more informative, which is the main aspect of one chart, is to present something that is informative and that is clear to interpret right from the moment we look at the chart. We have a recent group, Women in Excel, that Grania created with other women that she met at the Global Excel Summit, which is one of the biggest events about Excel. It happened in last February. Grania, do you want to tell people just very quickly how they can join?
Yes, we started this group when we noticed that there were an awful lot of people attending virtually and in person at the Global Excel Summit that were women, but up on the stage, they were much less reduced, much fewer proportionately than in the audience. So we thought we wanted to give women a place where they could learn from other women, support other women, and come to a place where eventually some of them would feel comfortable that they might want to do some presenting. So we've got all sorts of different kind of topics posted on this LinkedIn page and ask for people to post stuff. So there'll be links to people's blogs or YouTube channels or meetups or books, or just somebody comes up with a real cute tip. Yesterday, there was one that was a bit of a joke. That was, I thought, very funny. And so there's all sorts of different things. And we welcome anyone that's a woman to join and to be, if they're interested in Excel. So if you are interested in joining this group, we've been growing like wildfire. We're up to 150 people in about 3 months. So that's pretty good. And the link there, I'll put it in the chat in just a moment, but that's the link on that slide to join into YouTube. So if you're interested, please do join us. We'd love to have
to join on LinkedIn.
Join on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
And I'll put that in the chat right now.
There have been a lot of new Excel books coming in the past that were published in the past weeks, in the past few months. If you subscribe to my newsletter, I'll have the link at the end as well for that. I share all the information I find about Excel. Books are one aspect of it, and I share the list of I don't know, half a dozen books, I think, around that. This one is very recent, and we will have a giveaway at the end. We will be giving 2 copies, digital copies of this book. If you want to enter for the chance to win the book, just use the QR code. Just scan the QR code there at the bottom. I will have, did you put the link on the chat? I think you have it there, Grania?
Yes, the link's in the chat now.
Yeah, if you prefer the link.
I'll post it again later.
Yeah, if you prefer the link, you can go through there. Just enter your name and email address. It will be used only for that purpose. It will not, and only the 2 winners will be shared. The addresses will be shared with the publisher. So if you want to have a chance to win the book, just enter your name there and your email address. Miss Excel, some of you may know her. She specializes in webinars, Excel webinars, training on fundamental topics in Excel. She is running a webinar every month. There's a new one, and this month it will be about lookup functions and shortcuts. If you are in that stage of your Excel learning journey where you really need to understand the fundamentals, the very basics, where to start, how to do the fundamental how to use the fundamental features and functions in Excel, this might be a fun session to join. She's very energetic if you know her, so feel free to check that out as well. There's an event coming up at the end of the year, happening at the end of the year in December. The Active Cell, it's organized by the Financial Modeling World Cup, and or the same organization that organizes the Financial Modeling World Cup. And it will be 3 days. There are conferences, master classes, and on the last day, there were the sessions, the finals of the Financial Modeling World Cup will take place in Las Vegas. So this is an in-person event in Las Vegas. If you want to attend, feel free to check that link. You get 10% off if you get your ticket from this link. If you are really intending to go, I advise you to get your ticket as soon as possible, because they are up, the price is going up every month. So this, you can still get kind of an early bird price. I think that's all about that. And you have you will receive a PDF with all this information, by the way, or a link to get the PDF when you receive the email after the session in a few days. Just wanted to shout out my newsletter, where you can receive information. It goes out usually once a month, with all types of information like the one I shared: books, events, new features, what's going on, what has happened in Excel in terms of new features, improvements, and things like that. And there's the YouTube channel for this meetup group, my YouTube channel as well. So feel free to check that out. And I have a training program where I teach how to automate Excel reporting procedures, combining Power Query, VBA, and all the other Excel features that can be useful depending on the circumstance. If you want to check that, that's the link there. There are some modules that are free, so feel free to check that. And enough talking.
Celia, before you go any further, I have a question.
Sure.
Anam is asking, can beginners in financial modeling join this training camp? I presume he means that active
cell.
Active cell.
I would not be the right person to answer. I would advise you to get into the website and contact the organizers, and maybe look through the web page first and see what they say about the content of that event.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there will be content for everyone. Unless people are very at the beginning stage of learning Excel, it might be too much, but I'm not the one to tell you. So feel free to reach out to the organizers. I'm sure they will be willing to answer your questions. Okay, Chris, are you still there?
Most definitely.
Okay, thank you so much for your patience, Chris. We have Chris Gross. Like I said, Chris is part of the Excel team. And Chris, you have been developing a couple of different things in Excel. What are the main areas where you've worked in the past times, the recent times?
I've had the opportunity, the fortune, the blessing to work on Excel for almost 12 years now. So a lot of different stuff. When I joined the Excel team, I actually started out in the BI space and worked on a project that ended up being one of the first mobile apps for Power BI. So that was a lot of fun. But from there, I ended up getting my toes wet in everything related to the formula space. So I've had a large hand in delivering the stuff we saw with data types, with those first versions with geography and stock. Then from there, like I said, the function space with lambdas and the let function, and then all of that production. Most recently, I've been working in the Python space with a bunch of stuff related to that. And then as well, I did some work on the data types APIs, because I traditionally come from a programming background. So that's really one of my expertise areas and things I love to bring to Excel, is merging those two worlds together and really treating the Excel formula language like a first-class programming language. Because if you think of it as a programming language, it's actually one of the most popular ones in the world. But a lot of people writing Excel formulas don't necessarily consider themselves coders, although I certainly believe you can benefit from a lot of the principles and things that come from that. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I agree. And especially since we have dynamic array functions, or the spilling capability, this new way of calculating in Excel. And along with that, we have the let and the lambda functions. We now can create our custom functions just with Excel functions. We no longer need to use VBA for that. And it's amazing. I have been enjoying these new capabilities, and I agree with you. It's really a programming language, and having a programming mindset certainly helps you when you start to build bigger formulas, organize your reasoning, create your variables first, and it's very, very interesting. So, Chris, today you are sharing with us, you are teaching us about the Excel Labs add-in. The stage is yours. Feel free to fill in the blanks, anything I may have missed, and let us know what you have for us.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, so
Thank you.
I'm going to take it away from here. As far as questions go, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll be interrupted during the discussion. So I want this to be as much a discussion as possible, but I've been doing this for a while, so I'm happy to also ramble on for the entire time. So I'll either talk, or if you guys have questions, we can answer them along the way. And before I share, I guess the gist of what I want to get across is my hope is that by the end of this, you learn a thing or two about some useful resources that can help you get your job done a little bit faster, and maybe learn a thing or two and make the process of working in Excel a little more enjoyable along the way. So hopefully you learn something, and if not, hopefully we at least have a good time. And yeah, I'll start sharing from here. All right. So yeah, really what I'll be talking about today is mostly, I guess, completely about Excel Labs. So Excel Labs is pretty interesting because this project is actually an add-in. If you go, I inserted instructions here. Let me hit enter on my keyboard. I'll give you guys a link too if you don't have access. If you haven't heard about it, you should definitely check it out. At a high level, what it is it's an add-in that allows us on the product team to try out some new experiments and features without having to do, the full effort that it takes to release something and produce it, baked into Excel. This allows us to test things out faster, iterate faster, and not necessarily have to maintain something for a long time. Excel's a really great product, and our back compat story is one of the things that makes it such a sticky product and awesome and reliable to use. But sometimes that can make it such that we're not able to iterate as fast as we'd like to. And so Excel Labs actually was introduced back when we released Lambda. This has been almost 2-3 years ago now. The dates are a little fuzzy at this point. And we wanted to release it, and we actually released it as something called the Advanced Formula Environment, which is one of the 3 experiments we actually have inside of Excel Labs today. So today you've got the Advanced Formula Environment, which is all around advanced formula editing and authoring. And then we have an AI formula that we've introduced as part of the AI push that we have here across Microsoft. And then the third thing, the most recent one, has actually been the Python editor. So with Python and Excel, we think there's also opportunity to expose more traditional IDE or coding style concepts and a task pane style flow. And I guess the last thing I'd add with the advanced formula environment is part of why we built it was because as we were building the Lambda function and these more advanced capabilities, we realized that we have an opportunity to really re-envision what it means to author formulas in Excel. The formula bar is great, but it was built before a lot of these other great tools were introduced. And so my hope is that through some of the stuff we'll show today, you'll see how by making use of this, you can actually get things done a little bit faster and maybe improve your formula authoring capabilities along the way. So yeah, to get started, I already have it installed. So it's in my home tab, Excel Labs right here. But if you don't have it, you can go home, then go to add-ins. And then from add-ins, if you just search inside of here for Excel Labs, it should show up. It's a pretty seamless install. I guess it's loaded for me. Let me see if I can get it to, let's see, I'll click this button. This should let me view all the add-ins. And I guess in general, if you aren't familiar with the add-ins inside of Excel, it's a place where even you as MVP, or not as MVPs, as anyone who's here, is if you go out and you want to make your own addition to Excel, it's actually a great model for doing that if there's a specific task or thing you want to kind of release, much like an app store. So if I search for Excel Labs, it'll pop up in here and you can see our project. And then all you have to do to install it is click the add button and it'll be there from that point forward within your install of Excel. So once you launch it, you'll actually be greeted with this page, which is the feature gallery. And as I said, there's 3 different experiments included in here. The one we're going to touch base on first is the advanced formula environment. We also call it the AFE. I also see some questions. I don't know if we want to take any of those.
Yeah, one is related to what you are saying. Carlos Barbosa is asking, when there are new features, does it get automatically updated?
Yeah, I think the way it works, gosh, I don't have that happen to me very often. So if my memory serves me correctly, I think it asks you if you want to update at which point you can hit like an OK button and then you should get the latest update. But it's pretty seamless. It's not something you really have to worry about too much.
Yeah, I don't know if this depends, if this varies with different add-ins. The couple of add-ins that I have, my experience is that they just get updated without much. They just, next time you use it, it's there.
Yeah, one of the cool things about them too is if you end up making use of them, in particular, it gets saved into the file. So if you share this with somebody else, and let's say they don't have the add-in, they'll actually be prompted to install it and just have access to it too. So definitely one of those viral nature things. But yeah, Excel Labs is an add-in, and let's get started with talking about some features. As I said, the first one I want to touch base on is just the advanced formula environment. What this allows you to do is, at its core, we've actually taken something that's called Monaco, which is more than a city state or a place where you can go watch awesome F1 racing. It's actually the code name for the editor that Visual Studio Code is based off of. And what's cool about it is you can embed it in a lot of different locations, right? That has nothing to do with the Excel team. It's just part of our developer division and the awesome work they do there. But we actually wanted to take that and see what happens if you were to apply the Excel formula language and teach that surface how to author Excel formulas. You get a lot of the modern experiences you might be used to if you're used to other formula editing environments, things like syntax highlighting, IntelliSense, pretty formatting. And I'm going to show you a whole bunch of cool tricks that you can use from inside of there with your Excel formulas. And then the other thing we wanted to do was inside of Excel, when we were releasing the Lambda functions, as far as like on the team, what we'd signed up for, we'd signed up to release them, but we didn't have the liberty to go and overhaul all of our surface areas for authoring formulas, right? And that's again where the add-in is useful because we can experiment and see what actually works out of the ideas we have. But today, if you were to go use the name manager, if you aren't familiar with it, you can add entries into here, but really the advanced formula environment kind of supercharges that experience and then adds more on top of it. So you can edit named functions, range, and most recently, we've actually released a new debugger, which again, I'll demo some of that today, but I think the debugger is pretty cool actually with some of the Lambda functions because it really helps unblock you on some of the more difficult concepts that I've even struggled to explain when, I go to publicly talk about them. So cool. Not sure if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll continue on.
There's a follow-up from Carlos saying he asked about the add-in because it disappears from his ribbon and he has to put it back in, meaning he has to reinstall it again. And I've noticed that behavior in mine as well. So do you have any idea why that's happening?
I don't, and I wish I did. That sounds like a bug, actually. So I don't have an answer to that, but I can certainly go back to the team and see if we've heard any other reports. If something does ever happen to y'all when you're using Excel, there's a little button in the top where you can click and you can report feedback too. So just I guess a tip for when you're using Excel. We actually go through these on a frequent basis. So we do read them, and if you do if something does happen, we can generally hopefully get enough information or get in contact with you to learn more. Okay, so first thing I wanted to talk about was something that we call functions from sheet. And so the scenario that I want to think about here is I've got a pre-populated workbook, obviously, and I've got some data here. I've got this is just dummy data. So this is sales data on some individuals, and you can see how many sales they have. And then I've also got a profit table that relates to those sales. So you can see the individuals, there's going to be 3 individual instances for Sally where she's made sales and there's profit and so on and so forth. Now, at the end of all this, what I've done is done some analysis on the data. The first thing I wanted to showcase was this bit here where I basically wanted to figure out what the total profit was that an individual made. And then in the third case, I've actually made use of an XLOOKUP function to look up the individuals in the sales column to make sure that there isn't any sort of mismatches. And then I can pull the sales information from here. But at the end of the day, what I want to do is actually generate a string that tells me a little bit of information and gives a summary, and do this for each individual person. And so obviously I went ahead and did this. And what's cool about this first feature I want to show you is that it allows you to take any sort of logic you might have already created and then automatically turn that into a custom function, making use of the Lambda. And so we call that functions from sheet is the feature. So that'll be the first one I end up demoing today. You'll notice that I've got this grid version highlighted here. And what this is it's actually a per cell basis of an editor. I'm not going to talk on this one too much right now, but what I will do is actually switch to this names tab where you can say I don't have any functions defined. I do have some range information defined in a formula, but what we want to do is make use of this button here that has kind of a picture of a grid and then a plus symbol. And what I can do is if I select the region where all my calculations are happening and click this, it's going to help me go through a wizard to kind of turn this into my own individual function, which then means I can use it in other places. Because let's say I want to modify this string or want to make any changes to it. Well, obviously we have to do that old thing where you copy paste and you kind of figure out where your stuff was, which isn't the fastest way of doing things. So anyway, we've got my range selected and we can see the calculations happening between B39 and D39. It's intelligently been able to find out that the output cell was D39. Obviously you should always fact check this because we do our best to get it right within Excel Labs, but sometimes we get it wrong. And then the other thing that you need is cells to treat as parameters, which in this case, we're making use of the person Sally here for everything. So we'll type that in here as A39. And that's going to be our input cell. From there, you can click preview. And what's going to happen is it's actually going to go ahead and make that function for us, which is pretty cool. I'll be talking about Lambda and let and all of that stuff, but if that's all Greek to you and you don't want to go through the trials and tribulations of doing it, and you've already done your stuff the normal way that you might be used to, this kind of gives you an on-ramp to authoring these sorts of things. And one thing I want to highlight here is the Lambda function here. What's going on is its first parameter is the input to our function, which in this case we said there was one input, right? And that was the person. But you'll notice I never told it that it was person. And part of that's because we try to do some intelligent mapping if we see data that might be relevant. And in this case, I had the term person here, and that's how it changed the name. So you can see this is our function that we had, and it's making use of all that. Which means that at the end of all this, if I've done my work ahead of time, I can just come up with a name for the function. So in this case, I'm just going to call this sales report will be the name that I come up with here. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that this is hard-coded intentionally. So these are the ranges of data where my data was located, but we can actually do a better job of mapping those as inputs. And so I'm planting a seed in all of your minds right now because by the end of everything, we'll actually revisit this and we'll kind of revisit this one more time once we've learned a few more tips and tricks. Okay, so from that, I just simply click create and kind of like magic, at least from my point of view, we now have the information for that sales report. Let me take a look at this. Is this doing the right thing? Yeah, it is. Okay. The last thing I want to mention is related to how it's actually built that. You should obviously fact check what it's done, but what it's making use of is the let function here, which allows you to associate a name with a calculation. And we just picked names for the cells. And so really at the end of the day, it's a pretty simple calculation. It just picks the information from the first cell, the second cell, and then concatenates everything as we need. Okay, so now that we're done with that, let's make use of it. So if I want to, I can just type equals sales report now, just like any other function, and just pass in the data that I want. And so in this case, we want A44, and we can fill down. And just like that, I've been able to take one instance of something and make use of it. And now if I wanted to in another part of the spreadsheet, let's say I added another person, it becomes pretty easy for me to manage. But as I mentioned, we've still got some hard-coded values in here, so we'll look at fixing those a little bit. Okay, so I'll pause there in case there's any questions on that one. Otherwise, I'll move on.
I don't think there's any extra questions. Thank you.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Lambda. So what the Lambda function is, if you haven't heard about it, everything that we're using under the hood with kind of creating these named functions is based off of Lambda technology. Now, we do understand on the product team that, you know, one, it's a Greek word, so I always like to use that pun of, oh, it's Greek to me. But having said that, it is a rather complicated concept to wrap your head around. Even in the programming world, it's not the first thing that people learn about when they're learning programming. But it is a pretty powerful concept. And so all you need to understand from it is this function allows you to take your data or your functions and then be able to repeat that logic however you see fit. Another fancy way of saying you can roll your own custom functions without using external code. You can use Excel's formula language to create your own custom functions, which is what we just did with that sales report bit, right? I didn't have to write any of that. We did see some of the internals of it, but it's making use of Lambda at the end of the day. And then the second thing to make note of is how these things are maintained in the life cycle. So I'm explaining this here because it's always good to understand the layers of the way things are working. Doesn't mean you always have to dive into them to get the benefits from them, but it is good to know what's going on. So if I click Name Manager here, what I could do is if I wanted to define my own Lambda function, this is where I would go to if I wanted to add a new name for that function and add comments. But again, I think most of the people on this call are probably familiar with this UI. It's pretty old and it wasn't designed for this in the first place, which is why we've got this new awesome thing on the side that allows us to basically supercharge the experience. And so we can give stuff a name and then call it like we did before. Okay, so having said that, let's go ahead and author our first function. And I'll walk through some of the other tabs that are here as well. And before we make that function, I skipped over a point I wanted to make, which was around ranges. So you can see there's different tabs within here. We've got functions, ranges, formulas, and modules. We'll talk about modules in a bit. But for functions, that's mainly what we're going to be using here. And then ranges are what you're familiar with. It allows you to just make a named range, which can refer to a range in your workbook. Now, if I want to go ahead and roll my own custom function, in this case, we're going to roll one. This is more of a simpler example. I wanted the other one to be a little more complicated or maybe real world. But this one's a pretty simple one. We're going to just use the Pythagorean theorem, which hopefully most of us remember from, I think, algebra classes, trigonometry, one of those back in the day. If you don't, it's a pretty simple formula. You just take the square root of a squared plus b squared, and then that gives you the length of c, or the hypotenuse of the triangle here. So useful if you're doing any sort of angle calculations or lengths and all that fun stuff. So to get started, you can click the Add Name button. And what this does is it drops you into a wizard for creating your function. Now, what you'll notice is that there's no mention of Lambda. I'm obviously mentioning it because it's important for us to understand, but if you want to make use of this, you don't really have to remember too many of those concepts. This is meant to abstract some of that away from you so you can focus on just getting your job done. And so the first question we have to answer for ourselves is, what's the name of our function? Well, we're going to name it Pythag, and then we can add a description, which is generally useful and shows up in the help text when you go to call this. So a function that calculates the hypotenuse of a triangle. Okay. And then the next thing you need to do is add arguments. So this one's pretty easy. You just type them out. And then when you're done writing the name, you can hit comma. So I just hit A and then comma, and then B. And in this case, I'll hit tab to say that I'm done with that. And from here, this is what, again, differs from what you might do in the grid or that other name manager. I don't need to do any business around writing equals Lambda. All I need to do is write the function or the formula that I want to make use of. And one thing I want to highlight here is some of the IntelliSense that's just popping up and kind of those modern programming paradigms you're used to if you use other editors. I'm not going to call it out too much, but this is the first time we're seeing it. So you can see we get a complete function list, but it looks a little more modern than the one we have built into the grid natively. And in order to calculate this one, we need to take the square root, as I said. So we'll do equals square root. And then I've done this a fair amount of times, so I know the shortest way to possibly do this. We're going to call the function sum of squares. And then from there, we just need to call a, which you can see is actually got a different highlighting to it because we know that this is an input parameter to your function. And then finally b. And that's it. That's all we have to do for authoring our new function. And when I'm done, you can click done or click the save button. And then again, that'll be added into your workbook and you can use within this workbook. So now to make use of it, we can go equals Pythag. You can see that argument that we listed before the description, function that calculates hypotenuse of a triangle. And now we want our inputs. So I'll just click these. We want A and B, and we should get a result. Now from that, what I want to underscore as well is, you might be saying, well, I could just write sum of square root of sum of square somewhere else. Like what's the point of doing it this way? And the point of doing it this way is when you want to change something, which probably happens a fair amount. So like, let's say tomorrow the Pythag formula changes and we're using it all over our workbook. Now we don't have to worry about tracking it down. So just for argument's sake, let's say that suddenly you have to divide the sum of squares by 2 and the laws of the universe have now changed. When I want to update that, I can just update it in one location and all my calculations will refire and I don't have to worry about hunting that down. So that's just one of the things I wanted to highlight about the ability to really save your work and kind of put it into individual chunks, which is a common thing, that comes from many programming languages. Okay.
Can I
So-
ask something, Chris?
Yeah.
So that update of the function would happen within that workbook only.
Correct.
Okay.
Which there might be something better we could do. I certainly have my own opinions about it, but don't have anything else shared or able to share related to that. But you're right. It is locally contained within your workbook, but gosh, wouldn't it be cool if it was a central definition that, would just update in all my workbooks? So certainly an idea that we could maybe deliver on in the future. Okay.
Thank you.
Next thing I wanted to talk about was the different named bits we have here. So we got ranges, not much to really add there. We have formulas, which I do want to give a quick shout out to some of the more advanced functionality you'll find in here, in particular with COUNTIF. So if I go over to COUNTIF, this is a function that many of us are probably familiar with. If I do equals COUNTIF, you'll see the default information that pops up. So I need to select a range. So let's just select this range, which actually that doesn't work. Here's a pro tip as well. If you want to make a range reference from inside of here, it's a little different, but if you click the square brackets, you'll get this little finger pointer that shows up. You can click on that. And then from here, it should update your reference if I do it properly. Okay, there we go. So now if I make a new reference, you'll see it automatically updates it here, which is pretty handy. That's one thing I wanted to show. The second thing I wanted to show was some of the advanced functionality we have here. So if you're familiar with COUNTIF, there's a whole bunch of different variants of it, which for me, I always have to go to the help page if there's some that I don't remember. Like not equal to is sometimes different depending on which language you're working in. But we're able to actually kind of offer you some improved IntelliSense here with that. So let's say I wanted to do something like not equal to. You'll notice it just fills that out for me, which I think is pretty awesome compared to what you have in the product today. And so now I can just consider what the value is that I want to change. And it's already highlighted for me. So I guess we can count if it's not equal to 10 since we know the value 10 is there. And then this will give us that result. So now I can make use of that just like I could any other named formula, but this one's got a little bit of an improvement there. So one of the other things I wanted to highlight, there's a lot of cool little bells and whistles as you mess around with the experience inside of this editor. Okay. So moving along, we said that we wanted to make use of another function, which is one I've pre-populated ahead of time. And so if you look inside of here, you'll notice you got formulas. We talked about that. There's also modules, and you can have multiple modules. So if you click down here, you can see all the functions that are contained within your module. And the way to think about a module is think of it like a library of functions that you just want to add to your workbook. So if you click up here to this modules tab, you see that we have the option to add new ones, but we also have one that's included with the workbook. And so in the case of what I'm doing, I've included one that I made ahead of time. And I think I used this in one of the examples for the original Lambda blog. But what this does, since we don't have regular expressions in Excel, sometimes you might want to replace characters. This gives you a way of replacing characters in Excel. And it takes in a few different parameters, a text string, the characters that are illegal or you want to replace, and then what you want to replace them with. And so again, this is just highlighting a little bit of how maybe you aren't the person who's going to go author this advanced set of functions, but you can make use of the work of others too. And this is where modules can kind of come in handy. So for this example, we'll just replace the characters here. You'll see it's popping up. I'll pick the text string. We'll pick this value, and then the replacement character we just want to get rid of. We just don't want to include anything. So again, like magic, I can remove the values 1, 2, 4, 8, and 6, which then leaves me with 3, 5, 7, 9, and 0, and that's all making use of lambdas. But let's say we wanted to roll our own. This is one that there's a few things I want to highlight actually on this one. Let me change the view of my screen here. So PRODUCTIF is interesting because we've got all these if style functions. So like, right, we've got COUNTIF, SUMIF's another popular one. There's a whole bunch of different variants, but one of them that we don't have is PRODUCTIF. So you can imagine maybe you've got a scenario where you want to check a value, and if a value meets some sort of criterion, you actually want to multiply all those values together. So we don't have it in the product today, but you can actually make use of lambdas to kind of build your own. And so the way that we've done that in the past is using this function called the reduce function, which I'm bringing this one up because along with Lambda, one of the cool things about Lambda is that technically speaking, it can be a value in and of itself, which means it can be a parameter to other functions, which again, it's kind of this mind-blowing thing, even in the world of computer science. It reminds me of that meme. I don't know if you guys have seen the one with Zach Galifianakis where his head's just like exploding because now you can include lambdas and encourage, inception and all sorts of recursion and different things can happen through that nature. But what's cool about it with this reduce function is it allows you to supercharge some of your abilities with other functions. And in particular, what this function does is it's going to take an array, and just like the word kind of hopefully maps to in your mind, is it reduces it down into one singular value. And so if you read the help documentation, which I do if I haven't been using the function in a bit and I need to remind myself of what the parameters are, you'll see there's a remark here that says lambda, and that's one of the parameters to this function, but this also has included parameters in it. And so I'll usually go down, and this is the example that we'll work through real quick here, where you can make a PRODUCTIF function, but this is a good use case for that one. And so if I were to go in the product by itself, you'll notice I can call reduce. I need to set an initial value, which I'll just pick 1 just so that I can get through the example, and then there's some array. And then what happens is I type lambda, and now, like I said, I have to go to that documentation. And part of this is a limitation with what we have on the product that we're looking to understand how we can improve, and there's a better version in the editor. So if I go over to the editor, we can make this new PRODUCTIF formula, which let's go ahead and do that. So within this modules view, you're going to author functions a little bit differently. This one is probably a little more advanced from the other ones. You're going to have to type lambda and different things. But the syntax is pretty simple. You type the name of the thing you want to create, you type equals, and then after your logic, it has to end with a semicolon. So the simplest version I could make is I could make a function that just returns the value 1. I don't know why I'd want to do that, but I could if I wanted to. In our case, we actually want to make use of the reduce function. And before I do that, I need to define the lambda that's going to wrap everything. So I'll type lambda. We said that we wanted to create PRODUCTIF, and we're going to say it takes a range and then a criteria. And this example I think is pretty cool because we're going to actually make use of lambdas as a parameter to the lambda we're making. So again, a little bit of that mind-blowing inception stuff. But we've got our range, our criteria, and then we need to define the body of our function, which is all the logic behind it. So to create PRODUCTIF, what we want to do is we want our initial value to be 1. And initial value is equivalent to this thing I'm going to show you called the accumulator. So hold on to that thought. So we've got reduce value 1. We know that our range is the array we want to go through. And then finally, we've got the lambda function. Now what's cool about this editor is if you remember, I didn't get those arguments before. So that's where the help documentation is useful, but it's even better if it just shows me and helps me autocomplete contextually. Here I can see that it's asking for that accumulator value. And the concept of this one's, again, rather simple once you wrap your head around it. We're basically we've got one value that we're going to continually pass through, and that's going to be the final thing that gets returned, and it's our reduced value. And that's what this initial value was. So it starts out as 1, and then we get different values, and we're going to do operations on them and then determine whether or not we want to continue passing. So a whole bunch of word soup. Let's get started on doing this. So I'll call this the accumulator, and then we'll call this current value. I like that term a little more than just current. That's what it means. And then finally, we need our lambda, which is the logic for what we're trying to write here. So the logic of what we want is rather simple. So we're basically going to write a simple if function here, and we're going to check the criteria, which is that lambda that we'll end up passing in. And for this criteria, we want to pass in the individual current value. And so basically what's going to happen is we're going to go through every single value in that array. Then we're going to pass it into this thing, and it's going to say whether or not we're meeting that test of the criteria. And if we do meet that test, what we want to do is take that accumulator value. This is the product part, and we want to multiply it by the current value. And then if that's not the case, then all we want to do is just return that accumulator value. So basically all we're saying is check if the thing meets the criteria we had. If it does, multiply it. And then if it doesn't, just continue passing that thing on to get a result. Okay. Looks like I've got some nested. Okay, there we go. We're good on parentheses. So that should be it as far as defining this. And then when you're done, you can save it out just like everything else. And hopefully go over here and we can make use of our new function. Okay, so we've got our PRODUCTIF function now. We want to pass in the range, which in this case, I've just got an array up top. It's just a bunch of random numbers. Shout out to dynamic arrays. We're going to be continuing to make use of them. If you aren't familiar with them, definitely check them out. But that's what that pound symbol means, is take the full array from there. And then now's the criteria. This one's a little bit tricky because this is where I need to use that Lambda function again, because now we're going to define our own function that does our criteria checking, which in my opinion is way more powerful than what you have with things like COUNTIF or SUMIF. I don't know if you guys have ever run into a scenario where that list of our options doesn't actually meet your needs. Like maybe you need to divide a value by 2 or do some operation on it. You can't really do that with our limited set of syntax. With what we have here, though, you can do whatever you want. And so for, I guess, just illustrative purposes, we're going to take in one value with this. That's the value we want to check. And then we're going to do an if check on it. So let's say if the value is, looking at the numbers we rolled, let's say if it's greater than, the value is greater than 10, return true, otherwise return false. What this will do is it's that final check for PRODUCTIF to say whether or not something met the criteria. And oh, that's another, I guess, kind of pro tip. Sometimes our autocomplete doesn't fix stuff correctly. Like in this case, it added the asterisk, which isn't correct. But now we're actually getting a value, which is pretty cool. So on this new roll, we ended up rolling some pretty large numbers. But now it's doing all that checking that we'd mentioned before. And as I said, like if we wanted to do something more complicated with this style, we can actually do that. So like, let's say we wanted to, I don't know. Let's say we wanted to use the mod function on the value. We wanted to use a divisor of 2. We can commit that and get different results. Let's do something crazier. Like let's do divisor at 10. We're only going to get 1 here based off the one I used. Let's divide it by 2. Hopefully you get the point though. We don't have any that are rolling 20, so we'll change our parameters here. Oops. Greater than, let's do 5. There we go. But again, hopefully this illustrates the purpose of like, with this version, you can actually get a little bit more supercharged capability when you make use of lambdas within lambdas, but again, maybe a little more complicated concept. Okay, I'll pause there in case there's any questions because I think I see some, but otherwise we'll continue moving on.
There's one from Aurora. Excuse me. Where are the formulas created with the Excel Labs stored and how can they be shared with others?
So they are stored in the name manager. So if I go in here, they're all stored in here, but the benefit is instead of having, I don't know if you guys have used this UI much, but it's not nearly as full-fledged as the full editor we have there. So the benefit is it's all stored in there in a normal space, but I get a better editing experience with Excel Labs.
And how can you share that with others?
So it'll just be shared with the workbook. So I'll save these versions. I've got 2 versions of this. I've got a completed one, and then this one that I have right here called presenting. But actually now I realize I kept autosave on, so it's probably just committing all my saves. So I'll make a clean version for y'all, but it's just saved in the workbook.
Okay, and then Paul asked, can the formula created be used in Power Query?
I don't think so. That's a great question. I don't want to give the wrong answer, so I don't actually know the answer to that one.
There you go.
I guess the only thing I can think of is if the formula produces a spilled array, then we can use that as a source, a data source for Power Query. as we could do with any spilled array. But the formula itself inside Power Query, I don't see that being. They are different languages, right? So Power Query, we have M.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I haven't shared. I'm not as up to par on my Power Query knowledge, so I haven't gone into the depths to know if I can use Excel function syntax. And then the question going on my mind is, if I can, then can I use named things? If I can, then probably. But that's why I don't want to go on the record saying one way or the other.
And that's all I see in the way of questions.
Okay, cool. So the next example we have is a more fun one that will show a little bit more of what we can do here. In this case, we actually want to do rock, paper, scissors. So Excel is not just for getting, the business stuff done. You can sometimes use it for fun examples, or actually even on the Excel team, we've had different, team offsites where we've used Excel to generate trivia questions and all sorts of fun stuff. So I figured this one would be a more lighthearted example to just maybe expand the surface area of what a function could be. Not necessarily ones we're going to go build, but you can roll them yourself, right? So in this case, we want to use rock, paper, scissors. And we're going to flip over to the web because we have, there's a GitHub page for Excel Labs. So if you want, you can go read all of our stuff related to it. But what I want to draw your attention to is within the advanced formula environment, there's a bunch of examples here. And so you'll notice that these are .md files. That means they're markdown, and that's how we get all the pretty syntax here. But you can actually take this information and then you can bring it into Excel. There's two ways. One is you can use this button right here, import from URL. This requires something called a GitHub gist. I don't have one readily available right now, but you can also just copy paste, which is what I'm going to do. And also, I guess a quick shout out too, if you end up wanting to roll your own libraries, you can contribute to this open source project. So here's one, the Microsoft researcher who's played a huge role in producing all this, Jack Williams. He actually has his own gist here for a bunch that he made. These ones I actually find pretty handy. The amount of times when I have an is blank and I have to wrap it in if is quite higher than I ever imagined. So there's a bunch of useful ones in here that you can start to include. But in particular, I wanted to draw your attention to this one from this individual, Preston Johnson. And they used, there's a programming language called Lisp. If you don't know what it is, it's an older programming language, pretty popular. Stands for, I believe, list processing was what it was originally created for. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that this person's included there. And as part of that, they added some arcade functions, which I thought would be cool for us to play with today. So if you click on this raw button, this will give you the raw text of that. And so I'm just going to simply copy paste that into a new module, which this is also how you can kind of maintain your libraries within your workbook, is using these modules. So if I click new, we'll just call this Lisp functions. And now I paste in, and all of a sudden, if I hit save, I've got all of these functions just added to my workbook immediately. And this brings me to another thing I kind of wanted to show here, which is another bit of functionality that is just lit up because we're using the Monaco editor. So if I right click here, you can click this button called Go to Symbol, which at first glance, you might be, what the heck's a symbol? Just click this button. And from here, what it's doing is it's pulling up all of the symbols in the workbook, or another way of saying it is probably important things or functions you're looking for. And so in our case, we know that there's a rock, paper, scissors one here. And I can just type that in, hit enter, and it actually takes me down to the definition. So again, this is what I'm showing in this module view, but if you have a whole bunch of different things, you can make use of some of this functionality. Another cool one that I like to showcase is some of these functions that this individual wrote are also using other lambdas, which I have no idea what they do, right? This one's just called format. I don't know what it, I mean, it's clearly formatting something. I can see some of the syntax they've created, which is similar to other programming languages formatting. But one other cool thing you can do is you can actually peek the definitions of things. So if you've rolled your own lambdas and you're reusing them within your own libraries, you can click peek definition, and this gives you a little peek view into the definition of what that thing was. So here we can actually see the formula that this person wrote for writing this format function. So just cool little tips and tricks that'll help make your life maybe a little bit easier as you go through these things. Okay, so we've got rock, paper, scissors. Let's close this down a bit. First thing I actually need is a choice. So I wanted to ask the chat. I'll take the first choice. So I don't know what people want, if they want rock, paper, or scissors. But first one that gets typed in the chat, that's what we'll go as our result or our choice. Oh, come on. I know you guys can type faster than that. Rock, paper, or scissors? First one. All right, we got paper. Cool. That's the first one I saw. So we're going with paper. Now if I type equals, we can make use of rock, paper, scissors. One thing to note with these modules is it adds it in a different style of notation. So since they're libraries, they're prepended with the name of the library. So in this case, I called it Lisp functions, and then there's a dot, but autocomplete makes that pretty easy for me. So now we want our throw, and like that, we can get some results. Let me pull this down. So it looks like we threw paper, Excel threw rock, which means we win. So I can just sit here and all day, instead of getting my work done, I can play rock, paper, scissors inside of Excel. I'd also throw a challenge out to the community if anyone wants to make one that generates like random sets of them so we can see what the distribution is, or maybe we can run a Monte Carlo analysis on it or something. So anyway, just a bit of fun that hopefully showcases a little bit about how you can use modules. And again, if you want to contribute, we're looking for any contributions. So feel free to check out our GitHub. Whew, okay, 33 minutes in, we still have more content. I'm not even done. Next one I wanted to demo was related to the formula debugger. This is a new one that we introduced a couple months ago. And I think the formula debugger is super useful for, one, just in general, debugging your formulas, and is meant to be an advanced version. If you've ever used the evaluate formula button, if you have tried to use it with lambdas, you've probably discovered it isn't too terribly helpful. And in general, if you're used to looking at other debuggers and maybe other languages, you'll notice there's a lot more sophisticated tools that maybe we could provide. So that's what the formula debugger aims to do. To make use of it, you can, within your workbook, if you just go to the grid, it's not inside of modules, but when you're in the grid view, you'll notice that there's this button in the top right, and it just looks like a little bug with a play symbol on it. If you click that, that's going to show your debugger. So right now I have a pretty simple formula. Well, it's just a value, so it's not really doing much for me. But if I were to do something like, say, click over here on this array where we're pulling in a bunch of unique values, you can start to see a little bit different result. Now, at first, it might be a bit daunting. You're like, oh my gosh, what is all this stuff? But hopefully by the end of this, you'll feel a little more comfortable with using it, and I'll show some of the value from it. So in general, you'll notice that each of these chunks are contained to showcase the data. And so the first view that I like is when you have an array of things, or you have range references, it's really good at showing what those are. So instead of having to be like, what was A4 through A7, you can actually see the value of it. And so we can see the result was ultimately the unique values from that list of data we had. But the way that that ended up working was we've got unique of A4 through A7. And if I hover over A4 through A7, it actually shows me a preview of what that looked like in my grid. So I don't have to go look at it myself. I don't have to use the step through functionality with evaluate formula, but I can actually look at these things in line. And then ultimately, we know that those references turn into Sally, Mo, Larry, and Kim based off the way that unique formula works. So that's just a simple example. I said before that we were going to roll a version of this with a version of that first demo I gave where we use the sheet functions. And we're going to make it such that we can actually pass in the arrays to this. And then additionally, one thing I want to do on top of that is if we go back to the original example, you'll notice that this version of it, it only took one value, right? Which we have arrays of things. Why can't we just pass in an array and call the function once and spend time doing more fun things than copy pasting all of our formulas, right? So we can make a better version of this. That's what we're going to aim to do. So in the cell right over here, I've actually built a different version. I was thinking about maybe rolling this live, but given the time constraints and the chance of me writing something incorrect, I'm not going to try to do that live, but we will copy paste what we have here. So here's the function. Now I could go through each of these lines and walk you all through it, but this is where the debugger is actually going to help us do that. And hold on to that thought, because one other thing I want to show you is how you can rename things. So you'll notice I have these bits called data and data2. These are just the references to the ranges, and I'm using the let function to do those. Within this editor, if you ever want to rename something, there's this bit called rename symbol. You can also hit F2 on your keyboard. But if I go to rename symbol, this is going to allow me to rename all instances of this and not have to go through and hunt and find each of them. If we look here, we said the data was A10 through B2, which I'm just going to call my, we'll call this the profit data. So you'll see that renamed it in all these different locations. And then finally for this one, we'll rename this one to the sales data. And that's changed it there too. So I'll just make a quick tweak like that. Okay, so let's see how this formula is working using the debugger. So this one's a little bit more complicated, right? We've got a whole bunch of nested stuff. Things are defined. At first glance, it's probably a little bit daunting. You're like, well, it's giving me the right result, but what's actually going on under the hood here? So we'll walk through bit by bit using the debugger. First thing is, this is our fully formed formula that we've written. But you'll notice there's these little carets next to the individual things that I've authored, and this allows me to interrogate what's going on. So first thing is we've got this profit data. That one's pretty obvious. That's just referencing here, A10 through B24, which is cool. Now I can see, oh yeah, that was my profit data. And we've got sales data, which is A4 through B7. I can see that. But there's these other bits that are a little bit more complex. So we've got profit call. What is that? Well, it looks like profit call, we're using the choose calls, and we're using that on the profit data bit, and we're just choosing column number 2, which means this is just going to be a profit column. And so at the end of this, we end up getting 15 rows with just all our profits. But we can validate that visually in front of ourselves. If I want to, I can expand this. I don't need to in this case, but you can actually expand it too. That's the first thing we've got. Then I pulled in the people that we had. So this is the result of that, but same sort of deal, right? We use choose calls to take the profit data. We choose column number 1, which guess what? That's the people names. So that's great. We've got our people column. Then we define a variable that we call people. And so people ends up just returning a unique list of all the people that are contained within our data here. So you can see again, we call unique with the array of all these things. And at the end of this, it returns the unique values. Validate that again. And finally, this is what I think is my favorite part actually about the debugger. And I think is a good teaching tool and testing tool that I've run into personally whenever I go build spreadsheets. And that is for these output strings. So for these output strings, it's making use of the map function, which is another Lambda function. But what this one does is it takes an array, and then it allows you to, for each value of that array, you can do some logic on it. So let's say you wanted to transform a whole bunch of values, or in this case, you wanted to iterate through every value in an array and return a string with a whole bunch of results in it like we're doing here. That's what map's good for. But what's difficult about the map function is when you click enter and you're done with your formula, you just get a result back. And Excel's, that's what computers are great at. They're really fast great at crunching data. But what that means is that for, at least with my brain, it's harder when I run into an issue. So a lot of times when I'm authoring things using any of these functions, I might just get a pound value back. And then I'm sitting there scratching my head wondering, what is this pound value coming from? Well, this is where this becomes pretty valuable, because you can actually go through for each instance of that array where you're doing a calculation and see what happened. So if you ended up returning a pound value and then that's the only thing you get, you can actually find out which piece of data was causing that pound value. And maybe, it was a blank cell, or maybe it was expecting something that was unbounded. But this is where it becomes pretty useful when you have a larger set of data. And so we can go through and see this. I'll just walk through one, and it happens for each of them. But what we'll do in this case is it makes use of, again, another let function just to parse out the logic a little bit. And you'll see we generate the profit, which is just a sum of the filter. So we're going to filter our profit column down based off of the people column, and we want it to be based off the person that we passed in, which in this case was Sally. So we get the sum of the filter. That include array gives us all the true falses. That's how filter actually works. And at the end of that, we get a list of numbers, just 3 numbers. which if any of you are good at mental math, you can probably fact check yourself if that equals 560. I trust Excel. It's going to add those values up and give us the sum of 560, and that's how we get our profit. Same for number of sales. This one's just that simple X lookup. We're looking up Sally. We're looking up Sally in this list. And then we're using the specific column number 2. So we end up picking this column. We're looking up Sally. Sorry, we're looking up Sally, choosing the columns from here, column number 2. Then down at the bottom, we end up with this reduced version. So look up value Sally inside this array. And then the return array is going to be the actual number of sales. And so at the end of this, we get 3, which is correct. We can see from here that, I guess, from the original choose calls, right, Sally is number 3. And then the final thing that ends up happening is just the bit of information we have where we concatenate the strings together. So from that, we end up with Sally, then just a concatenated string. And ultimately, we get a bunch of these, right, because there's 4 of them. And so what's cool about that is now as our array grows, this can actually grow too. Now, the last thing I mentioned was I promised that we would turn this into a function, right? This is just a singular formula here, but I haven't turned it into a function. So that's pretty easy to do. We can just copy paste this, create a new function again. In this case, we want to call this sales info with map. I'm not very good at generating names right now. Generates the report. And what did we say we wanted the arguments to be? Well, we wanted it to be the sales data. We wanted it to be the profit data. And do we need anything else? I don't think so. I think those are the 2 parameters that we need. We'll do sales data, profit data. I can just copy paste my function in. And from here, I can just remove these bits, right? These are the ones that are still hard coded. So since I made them the same, I can just get rid of that, hit done. And then assuming I did everything right and the demo gods are happy with me, we can go over here, delete this cell, and make use of our new function. So sales info with map. What's the sales data? That was here. Okay. What's the profit data? That's here. And like that, we're getting all our new results. And so what's cool about this, right? We just took all that information. Now that's our own function. And if we need to go roll a new report with different data, well, we don't have to worry about it. We can just bring our function over. Yeah, hopefully that shows a little bit about how the debugger and all that fun stuff works. And I know for me, it helps articulate a little bit about how these complex functions work, because otherwise you're like, wow, so it's mapping over everything and probably seeing stars in the sky and wondering how all these calculations are going on. So, all right. Any questions on that? Otherwise, I'll show the second to last thing today.
I don't think there are any questions.
All right.
That I see. I just wanted to confirm something. So one of the things that I've been struggling when trying the add-in was with pointing to cells, because
Yeah.
I'm so used to doing that. So as you explained, we just need to use the square bracket.
Yes, that's my cheat code for doing it. So if you go in here, let's just do grid. So if I type equals and then I hit square bracket, you'll get this little pointer symbol.
Okay, and then click the pointer. Okay.
Yeah, you can also click F4, but so probably better if you click F4 if you don't want to reach over to your mouse and you're doing this a bunch. Then from there, you can create your selection, and then you should see it update. Now, it is a little bit buggy. We're aware of that. But yeah, that's how you can make use of the range selection.
Yeah, good, because I was not aware that this was a possibility, so that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to show you guys that I didn't. Oh, so one other cool thing about this is, let's say you rolled a function and you wanted to rename, let's say, sales data. If you click on, I believe, how do I do this? I think it's here. Yeah, if you rename symbol with arguments, it should pick up as well. So let's say we change profit data to profit data 2. Big change. Now if I hit enter, it'll actually update it here, which would be my Lambda definition, and then everywhere else I use it. So
nice.
Again, just another little power tip that if you've run into this in the past, you end up just having to do a whole bunch of string parsing. And in my opinion, isn't that fun. It's a lot easier when you get these power tools to do things.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Cool. So next one I wanted to show was Labs.GenerativeAI. So this is, we're done with the first experiment, right? We spent 45 minutes on that first experiment. Here's the second one. So under feature gallery, we recently released a new, and this is one we actually rebranded as Excel Labs, was part of introducing Labs.GenerativeAI. But what this is it's a custom function that allows you to send prompts to an AI model, particularly one from OpenAI, and it's a function. So if you open it up, there's going to be a whole bunch of information on terms of use, conditions, all that stuff. But if you just want to get started with it, what I did want to call out was you have to make use of an API key, right? Otherwise, where's the charge going to come from, right? You're connecting to a service. So from here, you can just click Get Your API Key here. And then it's going to take you to your OpenAI account. And then you'll end up with a key that you copy paste. I'm not going to share what mine is, but you can copy paste the key here. And then from there, you can sign up for a free trial. But I actually wanted to show my personal dashboard that I have here. I paid for, because I was prepping for this demo, I paid for credits. I put $10 on there, and I've been testing this out a bunch over the past 3 days. And so far, I've managed to use 1 cent of those credits. So I guess your mileage may vary, but if you end up trying to use the function and you get a pound NA, make sure you check your credit balance, because I had issues with that myself. All right, so that's how you get started with setting it up. Once you have all those things hooked up, though, you can simply call Labs.GenerativeAI. And what this function does is it takes required parameter of a prompt, and then there's some other stuff that you can select your model or the amount of tokens that you're willing to use, and then temperature affects some of the other modeling capabilities. But in our case, we want to do something fun using all these things that we've actually built up today. And we're going to use OpenAI to actually give us a list of recommendations. So for me, when I have folks that come visit the Seattle area, the first thing that always goes through my mind is, should I have to take everyone somewhere? What's our itinerary like? What are the top tourist attractions? And that's what we're going to use OpenAI to help us with. So we're going to give it the prompt of list the top 10 tourist attractions in, and then we're going to pass in a city. So I'll hit and, click the city, and that. It's going to go off to the cloud, do its thing. And just like that, I've gotten some information back. And let me use, we're going to use the name editor, the grid editor right here. Here we go. So here's our function. Here's what our result is, which is pretty cool. So now we've got a list of top 10 attractions that we can do. But this isn't in a very great format, right? It's just one long string. We probably want to parse this out. So in order to do that, we'll do a little bit of processing with this. So again, we'll make use of these awesome editors. We're going to use the let function because I don't want to have to keep calling labs.generative.ai. I can just call it once and then reuse that logic multiple times. The first thing I want to do is just say, here's the call. We'll call that call. And then finally, I want to define one more thing where we're going to process the strings here. So I'm going to use the text split function, which if you haven't checked this one out, it's an array function that allows you to split text into rows or columns based off a delimiter. So the one I'm going to pick on here is I noticed that there's a dot. So it's got one dot and then space needle. So we'll actually use this to take in the text, which we'll just call, that's the call. Then the column delimiter. So we're going to split this into columns using the period syntax. And from there, that should be it. So if I hit save, wait, text is call. Maybe I need to use the debugger. Yes, it contains syntax errors. That's correct. Hold on one sec. Let's see. Oh, I think we're missing a parenthesis for the end of our let. Yep, there we go. Okay, so I'll save that out. I don't know if you noticed, one of the cool things as well about the editor is my formatting wasn't that great, and it just kind of auto-formatted things to make it, look a little bit more readable. But yeah, awesome. Now we've got our text split out. The only issue is that we've got the value 1 split as its own thing. But that's okay. We can solve that. We can solve that by using one of those functions we made before, right? We have one called replace chars. And so we want to take our call text string, and we want to replace anything that has an illegal character, which in this case is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 0. and we want to replace it with nothing. So that'll be our first string processing. So we'll say remove numbers is what we'll name this. And for argument's sake, I'll say split string. We'll name that there. Use it. And then finally, what I want to do right now is return split string. So let's save that out. Wait for some answers. Oh, I did the wrong thing. I didn't call remove number here. So let's call remove number. Okay, awesome. So now the numbers have all been removed, which is great. I want to do one more tweak, which is transposing this because it's a little hard to read that horizontally. I'd rather read it vertically. So we'll do a transpose on the split string. And then the last thing it looks like we need to do is actually remove this blank that's contained there, which in order to do that, oops, we don't want to do that. In order to do that, we're simply going to, second. What do I want to use here? Filter function. That's what I'm going to go ahead and use. We've got our split string. Now let's actually filter out any blanks. So we're going to use the filter function on that transposed version. And then we want to include, I'm not going to transpose it here. Let's remove that. We'll just use the split string. Filter the split string. And then we want to do the split string where we have, it's not blank. So we'll do that. That should give us our final answer. And I will transpose this. Okay. Save that out. Wait a few minutes. And just like that, we've got our top 10 list of different tourist attractions. And now what's cool about this is, again, let's take this. Let's roll it as a new Lambda just because we can. We'll call this tour guide. So this will be our tour guide function. This is just going to take a location. And then from here, we can do this. And instead of A3, we'll actually name this location. That should get us what we want. Okay. I'll replace this. Now we've got our tour guide function. The location we want is Seattle. We'll get the same data, but let's add a few more cities. You know what? I haven't been to Toronto. I'd love to go there someday. So I'd love to know what sort of attractions we could visit in Toronto. And if I want to, I can just fill across and we're going to get more information related to Toronto tourist attractions. So we could just add any number of cities, but just like that, we've been able to build a little bit of an example out making use of these things. So as far as what I wanted to show, that brings me to a close, at least on these two topics. I did have one more demo that I've given before for Python. So I can give a quick preview of the Python editor, but I also know we've only got 5 minutes left. So wanted to see if any other folks had questions. Otherwise, I can close it out with one final demo, or we can just end it here.
Yeah,
I don't see any questions.
Yeah, I think a quick run through the Python demo that you have. Is that the one that you are showing? That would be great because then people can refer to that.
Yeah, let's do that. Got it right here, weather forecast Toronto. So this one, my talking point is usually, I think one of the things that's great about Excel and the function language is how it's the heart of Excel. And so it can everything weaves into each other. And part of what we've been doing on the product team is modernizing the formula language. And so that means introducing a whole bunch of new concepts that we've made use of today, right there, arrays, lambdas. You can now use images and cells. And of course, we've got Python. And so for Python, what I wanted to show you was inside of Excel Labs, we've got another version for the editor that makes use of Python style interfaces. So you saw I clicked Python is the experiment under feature gallery. Oh, and another pro tip, if there's one you're using more than the other, you can click make default and then you can kind of skip this screen. If you ever need to go back, just click feature gallery. But from here, we can actually see all the data related to the Python cells we have. And what we're doing in this workbook is we're using Python to model the weather and create a weather forecast. And then from here, a Lambda is actually being used. So we're using a whole bunch of Python to do forecasting, and that's getting fed back into Excel. And then using a Lambda, we're building a weather strip to make use of that stuff. So yeah, for the Python thing, what's valuable is you get more of those IDE style interfaces along with other previews. So this is a little bit different from what you saw in the advanced formula environment, but again, is a little bit, can be pretty useful if you have something that's a little bit longer. So like, let's say in cell B5, I've got a pretty long bit of Python script I wrote. And if I normally wanted to work with it, right, I'd have to drag my formula bar pretty far down. But I can make use of the data here, and I can also see the way that things kind of flow through. And then on the other end, what I mentioned was we've got this thing called weather strip, which if I go back over to feature gallery, look inside of the advanced formula environment, we've got this weather strip function. Again, I can peek what that definition is. So let's see if that works here. Excuse me. I can peek the definition and see what's actually happening here, which in this case is a rather simple custom function like we made use of earlier, but I just define a whole bunch of images. And then depending on the forecast, I determine whether or not I want to return a picture of a cloud or the sun or rain. In this case, we didn't get any rainy stuff built. But yeah, that's I guess the quick overview of the demo I wanted to showcase on Python, where you can make use of Excel Labs for Python and Excel too. And then it gets even better when you kind of weave all these two worlds together. You can really build some incredible stuff that was definitely not possible just even a couple years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And within the add-in, I see so many things that are hidden or I didn't see them. And it keeps unfolding and unfolding. There's a lot of value there. I guess just need to get used to it and be aware that these things are available, like everything else in Excel, I guess.
Yeah, it's quite the rabbit hole, right?
Yeah, being aware, I think it's the starting point. Very nice. Thank you so much, Chris. It was great. I'm sure I'll be referring to this recording a couple of times. It's one of those sessions where there's so many details presented and so many little things that we can make use of it in certain scenarios that we may need to come back to it to remember how to access them. So thank you for having accepted the invitation, because it's not just a session today. The video recording will be valuable going forward for whoever needs to go back and learn. Thank you for making yourself
Thanks
available.
for giving me the time. Like you said, there's a lot of hidden features, and I'd have a pretty boring blog post if I just detailed every one of them when we announce stuff. So I appreciate the time, and yeah, this recording is hopefully useful in the future.
And so
oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say,
if I can ask one quick question.
Yeah,
sure.
Which is, I invariably would be able to follow what you're doing when I do step by step exactly what you did, and I'm trying to do it on my own. It's going to mess up. Where's the help button in Excel Labs?
So we don't have a help button. We do have, you can click on, that's great feedback for us. Actually, if you want to give us some feedback, then I can help make a claim for that. But
I think the feedback is I will get it.
Yeah, we've got release notes, which will tell you that information. And then, like I said, there's a general, we've got a general help page on the web, on the actual GitHub page. But really where I would direct you is probably to some of the videos that have been made by the community. I've seen some really awesome ones. I don't have them handy right now, but there's definitely some stuff there. But yeah, that's great feedback for us that we can certainly add more documentation here because it's pretty sparse.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so we have the book giveaway. So if you can stay for a couple more minutes, that would be great. Are there any other questions? For Chris, let us know.
I see a lot of great presentations, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah. Now this is advanced Excel, Aurora says.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, it is. And on a note of advanced, and since we also have a book, let me go back to sharing my screen. And since we have a book about Python that we just talked about it, and am I sharing the? I'm trying to share, but Teams is not giving me the thumbnails, so I'm just guessing. Yay! I shared the wrong, the good one. Am I okay? So there's contact information if you want to reach out to Chris. He's on LinkedIn. Here's the book. If you still want to enter for it, if you haven't had a chance, just take the time to just fill in the form. And I think we have Khashayar online. Khashayar, are you there? Khashayar is, hi, nice to see you. And apologies for the beginning of the session. We were on a different link.
No problem.
So Khashayar, he's an Excel developer, and he has been doing a couple of very interesting projects. I know that he works with R inside Excel for some of these projects. And he may have a very quick just demo so that we have an idea of what R can do, or how we can use R inside Excel. It will take just a few minutes, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to share your screen? If you want to, yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Chris. I see that you need to go.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Chris.
We really appreciate your help today. Thank you.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so the way that I use R and Excel is kind of very simple and powerful. So actually in the project that has many data set and lots of query cleaning, the approach that I use is kind of, I use R for running all the queries and all the manipulation for the data, which is very fast and efficient. So at the end of the day, I created like a simple data set. This is the final output of the R. And I transfer it to the Excel. So Excel just can only show the result, and all of the calculation are done by R. For example, in this project, there is a heavy data set on the backend with lots of queries and the data set. So once the user press the refresh, the R is gonna running and do the calculation, and at the end creates a Excel file, which is like a clean and organized table. And the Excel is gonna just read the Excel file through Power Query and update the dashboard. So I'm gonna just show you when I press refresh, the R is gonna running the process. And at the end, it's going to write the Excel in the Dropbox. As you can see, Dropbox is uploading. It's very fast and efficient. And then query is running to read the final output from the R.
So you are doing data cleaning with R instead of Power Query?
Yes.
To make it faster, I see.
Actually, instead of Power Pivot. Yeah, because lots of handling with data model are done with Power Pivot. In the project that has many data and the huge data set is not fast enough. But with this approach, so calculation are done by R, Excel is just showing the data.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so that people have a kind of a seed on their minds to possibilities. And of course, this is just one example. I'm sure there's a lot of, it's a little similar to I've seen people doing with Python. So we use Python to connect to sources, clean up the data, bring the data, and then we can use Excel to work with the resulting data that was imported.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you so much, Khashayar.
Thank you for your time.
Aurora is asking, do you have to install R?
Yes and no. In a simple project, yes, the user that is supposed to work with the file can install the R, but there is a way that we transfer all the code to a server. And in this case, VBA is calling the R script through the server. So the user can run this file without installing R on their end.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's do the book giveaway, and then I'm having a hard time with Teams here. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to stop the recording because we don't need to have the book giveaway on the recording. I'm going to say thank you to everyone who joined live. Then thank you again to Chris and Grania. Thank you for helping running the session. I'm going to stop the recording if I can, because today Teams is not being my friend. I cannot maximize my window. So anyways, Grania, can you stop the recording? Maybe you have access to it. If you can do it, please. If not, I'll just cut the video then at the